Welcome to the Great Basin Seasonal Outlook for November through February. Over the last 30 days, we've seen fairly cold conditions across most of the Great Basin, especially over the northern half of the region where temperatures have been 4 to 8 degrees or more below normal. Precipitation has also been generally over the northern third of the Great Basin, targeting mainly Idaho, Wyoming, into far northern Utah. Southern areas of the Great Basin have received little, if any, precipitation over the last 30 days, and even over the last 60 days have received very little precipitation and certainly well below normal for the time of year. Looking at our water year, which just started October 1st, you can see obviously the precipitation is only near normal up over the central Idaho mountains and well below normal over the rest of the Great Basin. Looking at some of our soil moisture anomalies, a difference of August, the image in the top left, to the end of October in the bottom right, you can see conditions have continued to dry in the soil, especially over southern and eastern Utah across the Great Basin, with some improvements further north over eastern Idaho into Wyoming with the precipitation. However, again, very dry conditions still exist over the southern half of the Great Basin. Looking at the drought monitor, you can see we do have areas of moderate to severe drought now over southern and eastern Utah and the Arizona Strip, with areas of moderate drought or abnormally dry conditions over much of the rest of Utah into the southern half of Nevada. These drought conditions will likely persist across Utah and the Arizona Strip into far southern Nevada through the next couple of months. This image on the right takes us into the end of January. Looking at the 10-hour fuel moisture, obviously with the dry conditions, we're seeing very low fuel moistures over the southern and western half of the Great Basin. We have had some recent storms bring cold fronts through the northern and eastern side of the basin, so we are seeing some much colder temperatures and precipitation across Idaho, Wyoming, and the northern half of Utah. 100-hour fuel moistures are still only critically low over the far southern area of Nevada into the Arizona Strip, and definitely higher as you move further north and east, and similar conditions with 1,000-hour fuel moistures. Looking at our current ERCs in southern areas of the Great Basin that have been very dry, we are seeing ERCs still at records, and some areas, especially across the Arizona Strip and southern Utah, seeing ERCs above the 85th percentile. Elsewhere across the Great Basin, ERCs have dropped considerably, in some areas due to the precipitation in Idaho and Wyoming and northern Utah, but also other areas of Nevada, ERCs have continued to drop just with the colder temperatures, despite dry conditions. Looking at some of the live fuel moisture, some of the recent samples take us into the early part of October, showing sagebrush fuel moisture in the far south is still at record low levels just due to the lack of moisture, and elsewhere across the Great Basin, sagebrush fuel moisture is near to just above average. We still do have quite a bit of grass that is moving into dormancy here across the Great Basin. And you can see the image on the bottom right from July, which is still representative of our fine fuel loading, showing the well above normal fuel loading over parts of southern and central Nevada into western Utah, and then still above normal up north towards Idaho. So it's these areas where after dry conditions, when we do see dry cold fronts move through, increase in the wind, we certainly could have the potential for fire spread if we do see ignitions. However, this would likely only last a burning period or two and be localized just during windy periods. So that shows now what the weather has been like here over the last couple of months. If we start looking at some of the outlook forecast, you can see for temperature, we are looking for the next 8 to 14 days, taking us through November 13th, showing warm temperatures and generally dry conditions. If we do have cold fronts move through the Great Basin, they likely will not have much, if any, moisture. They will just bring a drop in temperatures and some gusty winds. However, towards the middle of November, possibly from mid to late November, we may see a pattern shift, which may bring cold fronts bringing additional precipitation. So looking at the changes in La Nina and El Nino, right now things are fairly stable. We are in generally neutral conditions, with that the most likely scenario to continue here over the next several months. But you can see there is some spread in the models showing a warm bias, so we might see a transition to a weaker El Nino as we move later this winter or towards the spring, with only 1 or 2 models showing the cooler conditions. So likely neutral or a weak El Nino would be most likely here to develop over the next 3 to 6 months. Looking at the outlook for the month of November, again, we will see those warmer and drier conditions early in the month, but as we transition to the second half of the month, we may see a little bit more precipitation start to increase across the area, especially across Wyoming and over into northern Utah and Idaho. But even back over western Nevada, we might see some much needed precipitation towards the later half of the month. The 3-month outlook is not super helpful, just showing above normal temperatures from December to February, with more equal chances for above or below normal precipitation across the Great Basin, with still a dry signature over northern California. This will likely transition into dry conditions in the Sierra and also into western Nevada for much of the winter, but again, still fairly uncertain once we get into December and January at this point. Right now, still the wetter conditions look like they will be up into the upper plains, into the Great Lakes and the Midwest. So looking at all that, generally our outlook is for normal conditions for November through February, which would really be minimal fire activity. The only caveat would be when we are seeing the dry conditions and we do have dry cold fronts move through, if we do get ignitions, we could see the potential for fire spread, at least for a burning period or two, in especially the areas of above normal fine fuels. That concludes our outlook for this month. Check back next month for the latest update.